Every morning my phone lights up before the sun does, a small glow in the dark, a soft buzz on the nightstand, like the world tapping me on the shoulder to remind me that I still belong to it. I reach for it before I even open my eyes, because hope is quicker than sleep at my age. Hope that there will be a picture, a message, a sign that someone out there is thinking of me. This morning it's a photo of my grandson Liam. His hair is sticking up in every direction, and he's grinning around a spoonful of cereal like it's the best joke in the world. Underneath, my daughter has written, "Good morning, Mom." I smile, I always do. I type back, "He looks just like you did at that age. Tell him Grandma loves him." I add a heart because that's what love looks like now, a little red symbol sent through glass. Then the screen goes dark, and the room becomes what it really is. Quiet. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 82 years old and I live alone in a small house in Pennsylvania, the same house where my children grew up, where their voices once filled every corner, where silence used to be something that only happened after bedtime. Now silence is my closest companion. I sit up slowly because my knees need time to remember how to work. I swing my legs over the edge of the bed and let my feet find the cold floor. The house is still, like it's holding its breath. No footsteps upstairs, no voices calling from the kitchen, no radio playing in the background, just the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway, counting out another quiet morning. I shuffle into the kitchen and put the kettle on. The sound of water filling it feels loud in the empty room. While it heats, I stand by the window and look out at the street. The trees are bare this time of year, their branches thin and dark against the grey sky. A light rain is falling, tapping gently on the glass, like someone knocking without expecting an answer. I make my tea and sit at the small wooden table near the window, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. This table used to be surrounded by chairs, used to be covered in school papers and crayons and plates that never stayed empty for long. Now there's just one chair pulled out, just one place set. Some mornings I pretend I don't notice. Most mornings I do. I take a sip of tea and let my eyes drift around the kitchen. The old calendar still hangs on the wall, even though I forget to change the page some months. The fridge is covered in photos, not new ones but old ones, from when my kids were little, from when my husband was still alive, from when this house felt like the center of the world instead of the edge of it. Frank. Even after 7 years, his name still settles heavy in my chest. He used to sit across from me at this table every morning, reading the paper, grumbling about the news, stealing sips of my tea even though he had his own coffee. He was never a quiet man. He filled rooms just by being in them. When he died, it wasn't just a person I lost. It was the noise, the life, the feeling that the day had already begun because someone else was there to begin it with me. After he was gone, the children came home, of course. They stayed a few days, helped with arrangements, held my hands while I cried, promised they'd check in more often. And they did at first. Calls, texts, video chats, pictures of their lives moving forward while mine stood still. Then little by little, their world pulled them back. Jobs, meetings, deadlines, kids, commutes, flights, life. I don't blame them, I never have. That's what parents want, isn't it? For their children to grow, to go, to build lives bigger than the ones they came from. I raised them to leave. I just didn't realize how quiet it would be once they did. I used to think that once you raised your children, once you did your job as a mother, the hardest part was over. I didn't know that the hardest part would come later, when you have to learn how to live in the quiet they leave behind. Claire and Ryan were born only 2 years apart. Back then, this house was never still. If it wasn't one crying, it was the other laughing. If it wasn't laughter, it was arguing. And if it wasn't either of those, it was the sound of Frank trying to fix something that wasn't broken, just because he liked to feel useful. I remember standing right here in this kitchen, holding a baby on one hip and stirring a pot with the other hand, thinking how tired I was, how much I wished for just one quiet afternoon, just 1 hour where no one needed anything from me. If I could go back and talk to that younger version of myself, I'd tell her to listen better, to hold on to the noise, to let it sink into her bones, because one day she would sit at this same table and give anything to hear it again. Claire was the talker. She'd follow me from room to room, telling me stories that made no sense, asking questions I didn't always know how to answer. Ryan was quieter, more thoughtful, but when he spoke, he wanted you to really hear him. Frank used to say we got one of each so life would never be boring. Evenings were my favorite. Dinner on the table, everyone crowded around, Frank telling jokes that weren't very funny, the kids rolling their eyes, me pretending to be annoyed even though I loved every second of it. After dinner, homework at this same table, papers spread everywhere, pencils tapping, questions flying at me while I tried to wash dishes and help at the same time. The house breathed then. It doesn't anymore. Now when I finish my tea in the mornings, I wash my mug right away, because there's no one else who will need it. I leave it upside down on the rack and stand there for a moment, not sure what to do next. The day stretches out in front of me, wide and empty, like a road with no signs. Some days I go for a walk. I put on my coat and make my way around the block, nodding at neighbors I barely know. Most of the people who live here now are younger. They rush in and out of their houses, phones in their hands, earbuds in their ears, always somewhere to be. They smile politely, but they don't stop. They don't have time. I understand, I really do. But understanding doesn't make the sidewalk feel any less lonely. Other days I stay inside and read. I've always liked books. They keep you company without asking much in return. I sit in my armchair by the window, the light shifting across the room as the hours pass, and lose myself in other people's lives. Sometimes I look up and realize I haven't heard my own voice all day. That's when I reach for the phone. I don't always call, sometimes I just scroll. Photos of birthday parties I wasn't at, smiling faces on vacations I only see through a screen, captions that say things like "so blessed" and "living our best life." I double tap the pictures, leave little hearts, little comments. "Looks fun, so proud of you, love you." They always respond kindly, always. But kindness from far away still leaves a lot of space in between. Claire calls me most evenings, usually while she's cooking dinner or folding laundry. I can hear pots clanging, water running, Liam asking questions in the background. She holds the phone so I can see their kitchen, bright and busy, toys scattered across the floor. She talks fast, like she's trying to fit me into the corners of her day. "How was your day, Mom?" she asks. And I say, "Oh, the same as always. Took a little walk, read my book, nothing exciting." She smiles. "That sounds nice." Nice. It is nice, in a way. But what I don't say is that the walk was quiet, that the book was good, but when I put it down, the room felt empty again. That sometimes, when the call ends, I sit there staring at my reflection in the dark screen and feel like I've just been waved at through a window. Ryan's calls are shorter, usually once a week, often while he's driving somewhere. I can hear traffic, wind, the faint echo of his voice. He tells me about work, about projects, about the weather in Colorado. He always says, "I'll try to come visit soon, Mom." And I always say, "Don't worry about me, honey, I'm fine." I've said that word so many times, I almost believe it. Fine. After Frank died, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't become a burden. I had seen it happen to others, mothers who called too often, fathers who complained too much, parents whose children started to dread the sound of their phone ringing. I didn't want that. I wanted my kids to think of me with warmth, not worry. So I learned to be easy. I learned to laugh things off. To say I was okay even when I was. To keep my quiet to myself. At first it felt like strength. Later it started to feel like disappearing. There are moments, small ones, when it hits hardest. Like when I drop something in the kitchen and it takes me a while to bend down and pick it up, and no one is there to tease me about getting old. Or when I hear a funny story on the radio and turn to tell it to Frank out of habit, only to remember he isn't sitting in his chair anymore. Or when I wake up from a dream where the house is full again, and for a few seconds I can hear their voices, feel the warmth of it, until I open my eyes and the quiet rushes back in. That's when loneliness hurts the most. Not when you're busy. Not when you're distracted, but when you remember what full used to feel like. And yet, every morning my phone lights up. A picture, a message, a heart. And for a moment I tell myself, this is enough. Until the screen goes dark. There are days when I almost forget how alone I am. Days when the sun comes through the window just right, warming the kitchen table, when my tea tastes especially good, when a book pulls me in so deeply that hours slip past without me noticing. On those days I think maybe this is enough. Maybe this quiet life is what old age is supposed to be. And then there are days when even the light feels heavy. Those are the days when every sound reminds me of what isn't there, when the hum of the refrigerator feels too loud, when the ticking clock sounds like it's counting down something I can't see, when I walk from room to room and each one feels like it's waiting for people who will never come back to fill it. On those days I talk out loud. Not because I expect an answer. Just because I need to hear a voice. Sometimes I talk to Frank. I'll stand in the kitchen and say, "You wouldn't believe how tall Liam is getting," or "Ryan finally fixed that old truck of his," or "Claire's working too hard again." I imagine him sitting in his chair, nodding, making one of his little comments, pretending not to worry even though he always did. Then I catch myself. And the room reminds me I'm alone. The truth is, I don't even mind being alone all the time. What hurts is feeling forgotten while being told I'm loved. There's a difference. Being alone is quiet. Feeling forgotten is loud. It's in the way holidays pass now. Thanksgiving used to mean chaos. Me up before dawn, turkey in the oven, Frank sneaking bites of stuffing when he thought I wasn't looking, kids underfoot, football on the television, voices everywhere. Now it means a small turkey breast from the grocery store, a table set for one, and a video call sometime in the afternoon where I watch my family eat around a table I can't sit at. They hold the phone up so I can see everyone. They smile. They say, "We wish you were here, Mom." And I smile back and say, "I'm right there with you." But when the call ends, I eat my dinner in silence. Christmas is the same, birthdays, even Frank's birthday, which I still mark every year with a candle and a quiet moment. Life's big days have become small when you spend them alone. And still I don't complain. Because when I look at my children's lives, I see how full they are, how crowded with responsibility and motion, and I tell myself there's no room for me in all that noise, not really, just in the corners, just in the screens. So I make myself fit there. One afternoon a few weeks before the fall, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at the old height marks on the doorframe. Frank used to mark them every year on the kids' birthdays. Little lines, names written beside them in pencil. Claire's is higher than Ryan's for a year or two, then his shoots past hers. The last mark is from when Ryan was 17. After that, they stopped growing, and not long after that, they stopped living here. I ran my fingers over those marks and felt tears come to my eyes before I even realized why. Because that doorframe remembered what the house had forgotten. That evening, Claire called while I was making soup. "How are you, Mom?" she asked. "Oh, I'm fine," I said, stirring the pot. "Just making a little soup for dinner." "That sounds nice," she said. "You always made the best soup." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. You kids were easy to please. We talked about Liam, about his school, about how fast he was growing. She said, "Sometimes I wish he'd slow down a little." And without thinking I said, "Enjoy it while you can. It goes faster than you think." She laughed. "You always say that." Because it's true. When we hung up, I poured my soup into a bowl and sat at the table. Steam rose in front of me, fogging my glasses. I took them off and set them beside my plate, blinking at the blur of the room. And suddenly the quiet felt too big. I thought about the fall then, even though it hadn't happened yet. Not as a memory, but as a feeling. That sense of standing on something unsteady, of realizing how thin the line is between managing on your own and not. Old age does that to you. It teaches you how fragile fine really is. I finished my soup, washed the bowl and stood at the sink for a moment, hands resting on the edge, head bowed. I whispered, "I'm still here," to no one in particular. Just to remind myself. Because sometimes, when no one sees you, you start to wonder if you're really there at all. And then came the day everything shifted. The day I slipped on the stairs. The day I realized just how quiet my life had become. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. Grey sky, a little rain earlier in the morning, the kind of day that makes the house feel even quieter than usual. I had planned to do laundry and maybe bake something simple, just to fill the air with a warm smell. I told myself it would make the day feel less empty. I was carrying the basket down to the basement, one hand on the railing, the other gripping the plastic handle, when my foot slipped. It wasn't dramatic, no big crash, no long fall. Just a sudden loss of balance. My body tilted, my heart jumped, and I grabbed the railing too fast. My wrist twisted under my weight, and a sharp pain shot up my arm, stealing the breath from my chest. I cried out, more in surprise than fear, and froze there on the steps, half bent, waiting for the pain to pass. No one answered. No voice calling my name. No footsteps rushing toward me. Just the low hum of the furnace and the distant sound of rain against the basement window. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, listening to the quiet, and something inside me sank. Because I realized, if I had fallen harder, if I couldn't get up, if I had hit my head, I could be lying there for hours. Maybe longer. And no one would know. The thought scared me more than the pain. Slowly, carefully, I made my way back up the stairs and into the kitchen, cradling my wrist against my chest. I sat at the table and waited for my breathing to settle, staring at the wall like it might move if I looked at it long enough. My wrist throbbed, swelling already, stiff and angry. I knew I should get it checked, but more than that, I knew I didn't want to be alone with that fear. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over Claire's name. Then it moved to Ryan's. Then it stopped. I could already imagine their voices, the worry, the rush, the apologies for not being there, and my own words, automatic and practiced, "It's nothing, I'm fine, don't worry." I didn't want to start that again. So instead, I called Marjorie. She answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" she asked, like she already knew. "I slipped on the stairs," I said. "My wrist hurts." "I'll be right there," she said, and hung up before I could say anything else. True to her word, she was at my door within 20 minutes, coat still on, hair a little messy, eyes sharp with concern. She clucked at me like an angry hen, helped me into her car and drove me to urgent care, talking the whole way about how I needed to be more careful, how these old houses were full of traps, how I should have called her sooner. They wrapped my wrist, took some pictures, told me it was a bad sprain but nothing broken, gave me instructions, gave me a bill that made me shake my head. Marjorie drove me home, made me sit at the kitchen table, and heated up some soup she'd brought from her place. "You can't keep pretending you don't need anyone," she said, setting the bowl in front of me a little harder than necessary. "You live alone, Evelyn. That doesn't mean you have to be alone in everything." I shrugged, staring into the steam. "My kids are busy." She snorted. "Kids are always busy. That doesn't mean they don't care. It just means you've made it too easy for them to forget how quiet it is here." That word again. Quiet. After she left, the house felt even quieter than before. My wrist ached. My body felt tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. I sat in the living room as the afternoon faded into evening, lamps glowing softly, rain tapping at the windows. That's when my phone buzzed. "Claire, how was your day, Mom?" I stared at that message for a long time. This was the moment, I could feel it. The familiar path was right there, waiting for me. "Good, honey, just relaxing, love you." I had typed those words 100 times before. My fingers hovered over the screen. But something in me had changed on those stairs. I thought about lying there alone. About the quiet pressing in. About Marjorie's words. And for the first time, I didn't want to be easy. I typed slowly, my good hand awkward, my heart pounding like I was about to step off a cliff. I said, Claire, I miss you. I miss you in my house, not just in my phone. I read it once, twice. Then I closed my eyes and pressed send. The moment I sent that message, my stomach tightened. It felt like I had broken some unspoken rule, like I had crossed a line I'd spent years carefully drawing around myself. I set the phone down on the table and wrapped my hands around my mug, even though the tea had gone lukewarm, just to give them something to hold. I told myself not to expect anything, not to sit there watching the screen like it might light up if I stared hard enough. But of course I did. Minutes passed, the clock ticked, the rain kept tapping on the windows, my wrist throbbed in its wrap, each pulse reminding me of how close I'd come to needing more help than I had. I imagined Claire reading the message, her face changing, her heart tightening. I worried I had made her feel guilty, that I had added one more weight to a life already full of them. Just when I was about to tell myself I'd gone too far, the phone buzzed. Claire, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you felt that way. I felt my chest loosen just a little. Then another message came. Claire, I miss you too. I just don't know how to make everything work. I picked up the phone and held it close like I could feel her through it. I typed back slowly, choosing my words carefully. I said, I know you're busy. I don't want to be a burden. I just want you to know some days are very quiet here. There it was. The truth I had swallowed for years. This time she didn't answer right away. And the waiting came back, but it felt different now. Not like hoping for a heart or a picture, like waiting for someone to see you. After a few minutes the phone rang. Not a text, a call. I answered with a soft hello. Mom, Claire said, and I could hear it in her voice right away, the strain, the tears she was trying to hold back. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. Because I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to make you feel like you had to fix my life. But you're my mom, she said. I want to know if you're hurting. Those words cracked something open in me. So I told her. About the quiet mornings. About the evenings when the house felt too big. About the way holidays had shrunk into video calls and empty tables. About the fall on the stairs that morning and how scared I'd been when I realized no one would hear me if I needed help. I keep saying I'm fine, I said, my voice trembling, but I think I've been saying it so long that I forgot how to say anything else. She cried then. I could hear her breath hitching on the other end of the line. I thought since you always sounded okay, that you were, she said. I didn't realize being strong could look like being lonely. We stayed on the phone for a long time, not rushing, not filling the space with small talk, just being honest. Before we hung up, she said, I'm going to call Ryan, he needs to hear this too. Part of me wanted to stop her. The old habit still there, don't make trouble, don't stir things up, but another part of me knew this was what I had started. The next day, Ryan called. Hey Mom, he said, his voice softer than usual. Claire told me what's been going on. I braced myself. I didn't mean to upset anyone. You didn't, he said. You just finally told us the truth. We talked about my wrist, about the stairs, about how far away he was and how helpless that sometimes made him feel. He admitted that he'd always pictured me as steady, unchanging, like I'd just keep going the same way forever no matter what. I didn't think about how quiet it might be for you, he said. I guess I didn't want to imagine it. I swallowed. I didn't want to imagine it either. He promised to try to visit more, not in a vague someday way, but soon. He couldn't give me dates yet, but he said he'd make it happen, and for the first time in a long while I believed him. Still, when the calls ended, the house was quiet again. The same walls, the same lamps, the same ticking clock. Nothing around me had changed. But inside, something had. I wasn't invisible anymore. They knew. They couldn't fix everything from far away, They couldn't suddenly be here every day, but now they knew what my days really looked like, and somehow that mattered more than I had expected. That night I sat at the kitchen table, my wrist propped on a pillow, the lamp glowing softly beside me, and I thought about what Marjorie had said. You can't keep pretending you don't need anyone. I realized then that telling my children was only part of it. If I wanted my life to feel less quiet, I was going to have to do something about it myself. And the idea scared me. Because when you've been alone for a long time, even change feels lonely at first. The idea stayed with me all night. Even after I turned off the lights. Even after the house settled into its familiar creaks and sighs. Even after sleep finally came in short, uneven pieces. Do something about it yourself. It sounded simple, almost foolish, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how long I had been waiting for other people to fill the quiet for me, waiting for my children to call, waiting for pictures, waiting for hearts and emojis and little flashes of light on a screen. I had been waiting instead of living. The next morning I woke before the alarm again. My wrist was still sore, stiff inside the wrap, but better than the day before. I made my tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching the pale light creep across the floor. The phone buzzed with a new message from Claire. Just a quick one. How's your wrist this morning, Mom? Love you. I smiled and typed back, still sore but better. Thank you for asking, love you too. When the screen went dark, the quiet returned, but this time it didn't feel quite as heavy. Because I had a thought in my head. Around mid-morning, after I'd washed my mug and straightened the kitchen even though it didn't need it, I put on my coat and scarf. My wrist protested as I worked the buttons, but I took my time. I wasn't in a hurry. I hadn't been in a hurry for years. Down the street, a few blocks from my house, there's a low brick building I've passed 100 times without ever going in. The community center. A simple sign out front reads, Senior lunch Wednesdays at noon, all welcome. I'd always told myself I didn't need it, that those places were for people who had nothing else, and in my stubborn way, I'd convinced myself I had enough. But standing there that morning, coat zipped, hands tucked into my pockets, I realized how thin that excuse had become. It was Wednesday. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, looking at the door. My heart beat faster than it had any right to for such a small thing. Walking into a room of strangers shouldn't feel harder than raising children, or losing a husband, or living alone for years. And yet it did. Because this was new. And new is frightening when you've lived a long time in the same quiet. I almost turned back. Then I thought about the stairs. About the silence. About lying there and realizing no one would know. So I took a breath and opened the door. Warm air hit my face first, then the smell of coffee and soup, and something sweet baking somewhere in the back. The room was full of round tables and folding chairs, and every one of them had people sitting around it. People my age. Older some, younger some, talking, laughing, arguing about nothing important. Voices. Real voices. For a second I just stood there, my hand still on the door, not sure where to go. A few heads turned. A few smiles flickered across unfamiliar faces. Then a woman with short white hair and bright eyes waved me over. You look lost, she said, not unkindly. First time. I nodded. Well, don't stand there, she said. Come sit, we don't bite. I walked over, feeling awkward, like a child on her first day of school. She pulled out a chair for me and said, I'm Doris, that's Harold, and this is June. They made room, just like that. We shook hands, we smiled. They asked my name, where I lived, how long I'd been widowed. Simple questions, ordinary questions, but they felt like gifts because someone was finally asking. Soon a bowl of soup was placed in front of me, and a cup of coffee I hadn't asked for but was grateful to have. We talked about our kids. Of course we did, we all do, about how busy they are, about how proud we are, about how much we miss them even when we don't like to admit it. There was no embarrassment in that room. Just understanding. Doris told me she'd lost her husband 20 years ago and still talked to his picture every night. Harold said he used to work on the railroad and could tell stories that went on longer than anyone wanted to hear. June knitted as she spoke, her hands never stopping, like the motion itself was comforting. I listened, I laughed, I spoke more than I had in days. When I finally stood to leave, my back ached a little and my wrist throbbed, but my chest felt lighter. "I'll see you next week," Doris asked. I surprised myself by answering right away, "Yes, I think you will." And I meant it. From that day on, Wednesdays had a shape. I started baking muffins to bring along, blueberry for Doris, no raisins for Harold. Anything was fine for June as long as it wasn't too sweet. I learned who sat where, who liked to complain, who liked to listen, who told the same stories again and again, and how that was part of the comfort. Slowly, my world grew. Not louder like it used to be. Not crowded like before. But warmer. Filled with voices that existed in the same room as me. Voices I didn't have to hold through glass. My children noticed. "You sound happier, Mom," Claire said one evening. "I think I am," I replied, and it felt true. Ryan came to visit a month later, just for a weekend, nothing dramatic, but when he walked through the door and wrapped his arms around me, I felt something settle deep inside my chest. We cooked together, sat on the porch, talked about small things, let silence sit between us without needing to fill it. Before he left, he hugged me tight and said, "I'm going to try to come more often. I can't promise miracles, but I won't disappear." I smiled. That's all I ever wanted. My kids still live online. Their lives are still full of screens and schedules and endless motion. And I still live in my quiet little house, with my tea by the window, the rain tapping softly on the glass, the lamp glowing beside me in the evenings. That part didn't change. But I did. I stopped pretending the quiet didn't hurt when it did. I stopped shrinking myself into easy answers. I stopped waiting for a phone to fill a space only people can. Now when my phone lights up in the morning, I still smile. I still treasure the pictures and the hearts and the quick messages from a world that's far away. But when the screen goes dark again, I don't feel quite so empty. Because I know that later, I'll walk down the street and sit at a table with Doris and Harold and June. I know that tomorrow, I might hear laughter in a room that isn't mine but feels like it could be. I know that if I fell again, someone would notice. And most of all, I know this. My kids live online. But I don't have to live alone. Not anymore.